Hey, Off-Season After Dark fans, welcome to our second consecutive week of a lunchtime episodes. Figured I'd come to you a little earlier in the day, considering a lot of these days we're going to have bowl games going during the day, and certainly catching up on our portal news, which is going to be an all-day, everyday thing from now on. We've certainly had some big names dropping in the portal that we will get to in a little bit, but we wanted to first recap just briefly a couple of the coaching moves we've had since then. So when I was with you last week at this time, we had 2 FBS head coach openings, and we now have 0. So I touched on both of those, Michigan and Ohio, both of which have filled. The Michigan one, obviously, as most of you probably know, they have hired Kyle Whittingham, former Utah head coach, who was there for 21 seasons right after Urban Meyer went there. And fantastic job. Can't say enough about Coach Whittingham and the 177 games he won in his time leading the Utes. Should be some much needed stability for the Wolverines. I think there's a good chance that we will see Bryce Underwood stay at Michigan. We are hearing that Jason Beck, who was his O coordinator at Utah, is likely to follow him. And then D coordinator wise, we don't know as much yet, but one we are hearing is Jay Hill, who has been the D coordinator at BYU for a few years now. Before that was a very successful FCS head coach at Weber State. So the good move for Michigan this late in the carousel, which in most years it's not late. This year it was, with how early things started. Good move for Michigan. You need an anchor, so to speak, there. They need things to just calm down and get the ship righted for the next guy, which I think Whittingham will be very good at. He'll, at 66 years old, obviously we're not looking at a very long-term hire, 3 to 4 years, I would think. And then, maybe you'll be Jason Beck. If they win a lot of games, Beck could be that next guy. If not, you're not in as much trouble with a failure here as you would be if you're paying a ton of money to a younger coach. That would be then putting you way behind the sticks. That could be a disaster for Michigan. I think they were wise to avoid that. And as many of you remember last week, if you were on, I said Whittingham was one of the 3 viable candidates. I didn't think he would be the one that would get the job, though, but he has, and I think they're better off with him. I like the hire, and that's where we're at with Michigan, so they can move forward now, hit the portal, hopefully hold on to the recruits. Most of the ones I have heard so far are staying. They have lost they lost a receiver, but I don't think that'll be a massive drop off for them. Now we'll move on to Ohio, and the Bobcats. Obviously, they had the drama surrounding Brian Smith, who was just there for 1 year as the head coach. Prior to that, both John Hauser and Smith were assistants for Tim Albin. John Hauser, the D coordinator, has been named the permanent head coach, as I talked about and suspected would happen. Last week, in Hauser's first game. Well, technically he was still the interim for the bowl game, but they played UNLV in the Frisco Bowl, and they won that game 17-10. So John Hauser start things off winning, and good hire for the Bobcats. They've been a very even keel team. We're seeing a lot of success. They're going to bowl games almost every year, high floor. So good for them. In other coaching news, those are the only head coaching ones we had. I talked at length last week about the possibility of Marcus Freeman going to the NFL. Reportedly, the New York Giants were very interested in him, and the Tennessee Titans were also ones that popped up as a possible job for Freeman. It has come out in the last hour or so that he said he's staying at Notre Dame. With the NFL season not quite over yet, that may still be put to the test, but it would appear that if Freeman is indeed staying with the Irish and going to be at Notre Dame in 2026, which is a massive keep for them, with the roster he's built and games they've won, it would have been a big loss if he would have went to the NFL. Even if they would have hired a good replacement, you still risk a lot there. So that's where we're at. Coaching wise, no other FBS openings now, and with Freeman being the only likely one to go to the NFL, we may not see any other openings at the FBS level. There is a distinct possibility that we know who all of our 130 plus coaches will be for next season, and that they are with their teams right now. Now we'll move on to the portal, and we've seen a lot of movement here. I will briefly touch on the quarterbacks. Why I'm not going to get as in-depth into the QBs today is because they were the only position I focused on last week. I went in-depth with a lot of the portal QBs. Since last week, we haven't seen any of them commit. Officially, the portal's not even open right now, so they can't commit yet. But the ones we saw that were, big names, talked about Brennan Sorsby from Cincinnati, hasn't committed yet. Looks like he's going to go to Texas Tech. DJ Lagway from Florida, hearing Baylor, Miami, LSU as potential options for him. Dylan Raiola, Nebraska. Oregon and Mizzou are two that, could be out there for him. The Oregon one is predicated on Dante Moore leaving for the NFL, which may or may not happen. Byron Brown from South Florida has went in the portal since then. The logic would tell us he may follow Alex Golish to Auburn. That would make a lot of sense there. Rocco Becht has left Iowa State. That is a new one relative to the last time we were on the show. Of course, his coach, Matt Campbell, went to Penn State. I don't know if Beck is a caliber QB for Penn State. I think they could do better there, but considering Beck's familiarity with Campbell's offense, it wouldn't shock me if Rocco Becht ends up at Penn State there. Another new one we have in the portal is a guy who has had a lot of success over the last couple of years, and that's Josh Hoover, who was at TCU. Their O coordinator, Kendall Briles, of course, has gone to South Carolina since then. Hoover not going to go there, just with Lenore Sellers already being there. The strong opinions we are hearing on Josh Hoover is that he will be at Indiana next year. So that's the rub there, and what we're hearing. Because of how much I talked about the QBs last week, we're going to move on a little bit. So not getting as in-depth with QBs. Will in future episodes, certainly, but not right now. Going to talk about a couple massive running back and receiver additions we have had to the portal over the last 24 hours. At running back, Caleb Hawkins, who was a true freshman at North Texas this year. They were his only offer at the FBS level. He lit the world on fire at UNT, and obviously, we saw all the things they did with Eric Morris, who now is going to Oklahoma State. But Hawkins, he had he was over 1,000 yards this year. Was the AAC Freshman of the Year, Freshman All-American. He 6'2", 200 plus pounds, fits the profile. He has entered the portal, and in conjunction with 3 of Texas's top 4 running backs going in the portal, including Trey Wisner, who I'll talk about shortly. Hawkins staying in state, going to Texas would make sense. 2 other schools we are hearing very early on for Hawkins that are going to be in the mix are both SEC teams, and that is LSU and the Florida Gators. So Texas, LSU, Florida, 3 teams to watch early in the Caleb Hawkins sweepstakes. Trey Wisner, obviously with Texas's #1 running back this year, surprisingly entered the portal a couple days ago, which tells me Sark had told him we're either bringing in someone, and maybe he knew who it was and we don't yet, or just that we're going to look elsewhere. But Wisner's a good back. He's not quite as big as Hawkins, but some of the schools that recruited him hard that could be on him, I just mentioned Florida as an option for Hawkins. If he doesn't end up at Florida, Wisner could then go there. Auburn, Arkansas, Baylor, all schools that recruited Wisner heavy who could be in the mix there. So expect him to be at a big school. Another one we have is Hollywood Smothers, who started his career at Oklahoma, spent this past year at NC State. Was there for a couple of years, but good player at NC State. He, another decent sized bodied guy, 5'11", over 200 pounds, did a lot of good things in that Dave Doran offense. But Hollywood Smothers will be a guy to watch in the portal who is a big name running back. Another one, and we're not only recognition-wise, we might be getting a little down the list, but size-wise, we're getting bigger. Adam Muhammad, a workhorse of a back for Jed Fish at Washington. He loves the bowling ball type guys. Muhammad's 6 feet, about 225. Had initially, like Damon Williams, signed with Arizona. Then a week or 2 later, when Fish took the job at Washington, followed Jed Fish to Washington. So I was a little surprised Muhammad leaving, thought he might stay, and depending on what happens with Jonah Coleman there, Muhammad would have made sense as the next guy, but he's originally a Phoenix area native, so potentially going to Arizona State, back to Arizona. Cal is another school with Tosh Lupoy going there as head coach, that Muhammad could be in the mix at Cal. Another guy I want to talk about a lot, or tell you about, is Cam Cook. So Cook himself was at Jacksonville State this year, where he ran for over 1,600 yards and 16 touchdowns. I mean, that's scoring a lot. He was probably the best running back in CUSA. He was the CUSA Player of the Year, and he was the CUSA Newcomer of the Year after transferring from TCU. I expect Cam Cook could be another guy in the mix at Texas, which is his home state. But you look for the Longhorns to get one of these bigger names, whether it's Hawkins or Cook. I think they get one of them, and LSU and the Gators could both be in the mix as well. But Cam Cook, I mean, in the portal world we're living in, Cam Cook did what a lot of guys will aspire to do, and that is he started at a Power 4 school he wasn't fitting in well at, goes to a G5 school, dominates for a year, then is going to kick back to a power conference school a year later now. So that's Cam Cook from Jacksonville State will be moving on now. So good for him. Now we're going to move to the receivers. And as of this morning, we have one of the big fish we expected might hit the portal has done so, and that is Cam Coleman from Auburn. The rumors were out there. We thought it was going to happen, and finally it did today. So Coleman was at Auburn for 2 years. Obviously, not many things went right for Auburn in his time there, but at 6'3", over 200 pounds, even though he'll only be at his school maybe for a year next year, this is a guy who has an NFL body, frame, all the tools to succeed at the next level, and I suspect he will. He is an Alabama native, Phoenix City, so right on that Georgia border, but the bluest of the blue bloods will be going after Cam Coleman. I think some schools to look at. Texas A&M would make a lot of sense, as would LSU. Both of those schools are going to have ample NIL money and will want a big-bodied receiver. I mean, there is not a school in the country he will not start for. He's that good. So, again, Cam Coleman, this has just happened today, but has entered the portal. And you can basically look at the blue blood schools, throw a dart at him. They're going to want Cam Coleman because everybody's going to want him. He will literally could pick the school he wants to go to. I think A&M and LSU will be two schools heavily in the mix for him. And the variable outlier there, as could be with any of the studs, is Texas Tech going to throw a lot of money at him? Maybe they could be too. So we'll see what happens there. Another receiver who has hit the portal in the last couple days since I did my last transfer portal episode last week is Omarion Miller from University of Colorado. So played for the Buffs. Another decent-sized bodied guy, 6'2", 210, was originally a Nebraska commit, but was at Colorado for 2 seasons, played 24 and 25 there. Now, after their extremely disappointing year, I written about that from Mike Farrell, that published today, talking about disappointing coaches. Certainly that they qualified and were the most disappointing Big 12 team, but Omarion Miller in the portal now from Colorado. He could be another possible LSU target. He is a Shreveport, Louisiana area native, so that northwestern part of the state there. So I think LSU, Arkansas, Oklahoma could be some teams to look for Omarion Miller. Another good portal receiver who has been in the portal for almost a month now, did so right after the regular season ended, is Nick Marsh from Michigan State. Not going to stick around and be a part of the Pat Fitzgerald era. Another massive bodied guy like Coleman, 6'3", over 200 pounds. He was a Penn State and Pittsburgh target out of high school. They both recruited him hard, as did the Kansas Jayhawks. So maybe he ends up at a blue blood school we don't know about. It's going to be interesting where he goes, but those might be some schools to monitor for him. He also, one rumor with him is that Clemson could be on Marsh, despite what we have seen over the last few years and or heard about. Dabo actually has used the portal a little bit the last couple of years, albeit not as much as a lot of schools have. Eugene Trey Wilson, Florida Gators, also in the portal, and that has happened over the last week. He entered the same day Omarion Miller did, but leaving the Gators, not going to be there. Up and down season for him, and we are hearing for Wilson that Texas Tech is a definite option and a school that he is most likely going to visit. Chase Hendricks from Ohio, talked about them hiring a coach, but Chase Hendricks, receiver for the Bobcats, will be entering the portal. He's originally a St. Louis guy. Mizzou could be one to look for him, but that was another name who I think will be an interesting pickup somewhere. Chase Hendricks, a guy that will make the jump from G5 to P4. Jace Brown was a very good receiver at Kansas State, also in the portal. And then some other portal receivers to look for. I'm not going to get it into these guys at length, but Walker Lyons was a tight end at USC. And then Iowa State lost 2 tight ends, Ben Bramer being the first one. And Burkle is the other tight end that they were both at Iowa State leaving. Penn State will be one to look for with Matt Campbell there. Perry Thompson from Auburn was another one who, massive recruit coming out of high school, will be a guy to look at there. So I expect at both running back and receiver, we will get more guys entering the portal, but haven't yet. The offensive line position, we have picked up a lot of guys in the previous days. For a while there, we basically only had the 2 UConn tackles. So when Jim Moore Jr. left UConn, Ben Morowski and Karsten Cassidy both entered the portal, stud tackles. And we saw how much UConn struggled with them in the bowl game not being there. Excuse me. But they'll both be massive pickups somewhere. They will both be playing P4 football. Morowski is an absolute mammoth of a guy, 6'7", 335. Cassidy is equally as tall, though not quite as thick, coming in at 6'7", about 300 pounds. The other early entry in the portal, and this happened a long time ago, was Noah McKinney, guard from Oklahoma State, who was committed to TCU. He's about the only big name guy we've had who's actually committed somewhere so far. And 2 other massive portal additions on the O-line, both come from the SEC. We had Carius Curry from LSU, who's originally an Arkansas native, but at 6'5", 320, he is currently rated the highest offensive lineman in the portal. There will be no shortage of suitors for him. I think Arkansas, Florida, Louisville, and potentially the South Carolina Gamecocks could be options for Carius Curry, but good player. And then Xavier Chaplin at 6'7" and almost 350 pounds will be leaving the Auburn Tigers. He was at Virginia Tech previously and was at Auburn for 1 year and is leaving. A South Carolina native. The Gamecocks could be ones to look for him, as could LSU and the Gators. We're certainly seeing a theme with the teams we expect to be heavy in the portal. The Gamecocks themselves lost 2 decent tackles, though that team certainly has struggled on the O-line the last couple of years. But Kason Henry and Trey Babalade both have left the Gamecocks, as Josh Atkins is another decent tackle who has left Arizona State. He's a Dallas area guy who, decent O-lineman. He had been at Hawaii before that, so he'll be a name to look for. Connor Stroh and Shadray Hurst are two interior O-linemen to look at. Stroh will be coming from Texas, and Shadray Hurst from the Tulane Green Wave. So I think with Hurst, well, obviously, one to look for is going to be if he will follow John Summerall to Florida. That'll be an interesting one to look for. And then another interesting guard and a absolute massive body is going to be Tyrell Green at 6'5", 360. He's as big as they come. He was at Purdue this most recent year after playing FCS ball before that. But if you want a road grader guy who is good in the run game, certainly Tyrell Green will be a guy to look for there. Henry Faneku, another interior O-line guy from Missouri. He's probably going to be a center, at a bigger school looking at his body, but will be a decent addition. We've not seen many guys enter the portal who we know will be centers. So that'll be something else to monitor in the portal, are guys who could play center at big schools or project to do that at the next level. Then tight ends, I talked about a few of them, the Iowa State guys and Walker Lyons before. Some of the other tight ends we've seen hit the portal. Brody Foley is the highest rated one, good in the run game and the pass game. He comes from Tulsa. So he'll be an NFL guy. He was at Indiana prior to the Cignetti years, then has been at Tulsa, so playing well. Another very good receiving tight end who's in the portal now is Javante Connor, who is coming from East Carolina. So he's a 6'4", 240, very athletic guy. He was originally at Ole Miss, then went to ECU. Now, Ole Miss could be a potential for him to transfer back to, because remember, John David Baker, ECU's O coordinator, has taken the OC job at Ole Miss. So for Javante Connor, going back to Ole Miss could be an option, but some other schools that we could see the mix for him that might fit his skill set would be Florida State, South Carolina, Auburn, or if he wants to stay in his home state of North Carolina, NC State and the Tar Heels both could be options there. One coordinator thing we did see recently hiring-wise, Bill Belichick at North Carolina hired Bobby Petrino as his O coordinator. He uses tight ends, so Connor could stay there. Randy Pittman, Florida State, another one who entered the portal. And another very interesting portal, a guy from who was playing football at my home state, Luke Denecki, is coming up to us from the D2 level. He was at the University of Minnesota Duluth. He will be most likely a Power 4 player. So highly thought of tight end. Luke Denecki's his name, coming from Minnesota Duluth. Juice Vereen, another guy who has left UConn in addition to their O tackles. He is a receiving guy, slight body, but decently tall at 6'4". So Juice Vereen will go somewhere and be a receiving tight end. Speaking of him leaving UConn, I saw a stat or tidbit this morning that said UConn and James Madison on the offensive side of the ball next year, they will both almost certainly have 11 new starters. So talk about turnover for those schools. So now I will get to the defensive side of the ball. Haven't been talking about that. Didn't talk about it last week. Haven't yet today. So on the defensive side, the top D lineman, and this is an edge guy, Chaz Coleman from Penn State. He was one of the top recruits, coming out of high school in 24. So he was only at Penn State for 1 year, but he's entered the portal. We're hearing that Ohio State could be an option for him. He was heavily recruited by them out of high school. Tennessee as another option was a team in on him, and then one to look for because of coaching wise. His edge coach at Penn State has taken the job at South Carolina, so the Gamecock could be another team in the mix for Chaz Coleman. The top interior D lineman in the portal is Mateen Iberogba, and he was at Wake Forest. 6'3", 300 pounds, a Washington, D.C. area native guy. But Iberogba will be a guy to look for. Some of the big schools who need an interior guy will be on him. He's a guy who, looking at his profile, he reminds me of some of the big interior guys we saw at Texas, with Tavondre Sweat, Murphy being there. So whoever gets him will be getting a good size guy. Devin Tompkins, another good D tackle from USC in the portal. Amos Williams, an edge from Auburn, and then Toby Usasanmi from K-State, another edge, will be guys to look for. But D-line is another one where I'm a little bit surprised at the lack of big names we've seen enter the portal. It could be that the guys entering the portal, their season is still going on, or maybe the head coaches at their current schools are giving them more NIL than we expected. That certainly could be a possibility. But D-line, we're not seeing a ton. Wendell Gregory was an edge at Oklahoma State, again, entered the portal a long time ago, as did many of the Cowboys. So at the linebacker position, probably seeing even less, top-notch guys than we have at D-line. Omar Graham at Florida State, Kobe McKenzie, Oklahoma guys to look for. Omar Graham, a Fort Lauderdale area guy. I think some of the schools that we've heard for him are Miami, Auburn, Arizona State. So that'll be curious to see where Omar Graham goes. And then McKenzie leaving the Oklahoma Sooners. He's a Lubbock native, so certainly going back to Texas Tech could be an option for him, as could going to the Longhorns. So we will see what happens there. Two other linebackers to note are Kamori House from North Carolina and Robert Woodyard from Auburn. So that'll they're guys to monitor. Just in recent minutes, we have seen another QB who's going to enter the portal, Billy Edwards from Wisconsin, who was at Maryland before. Maybe he ends up at a P4 school, but he could be a G5 guy. We'll see what happens with Edwards. At the defensive back position, another former Seminoles, the top guy there, Jabril Rawls, slender bodied guy, but very tall and lanky, decent cover guy. And then Jontez Williams is one of the top corners in the portal. You remember he was at Iowa State, and he got hurt this season and missed the end of the year, but was very good when he was playing. I certainly think for Jontez Williams, Penn State's going to be one to look for if he follows Matt Campbell there, especially with we're hearing that DeAnton Lynn, the D coordinator for Lincoln Riley at USC, is likely to be the new D coordinator for the Nittany Lions. So that's going to be one to monitor. Jay Crawford from Auburn, another good corner cover guy who's going to be in the portal. And Crawford is a Georgia guy. I certainly think he ends up at a SEC or an ACC school. He'll end up somewhere decent. Boo Carter is the top safety in the portal currently, from Tennessee. Good player, good in kind of played that slot nickel defender type role where he impacted the run game as well as covered guys in the pass game. So Boo Carter is going to be a guy who, for a team using a nickel type defense, he will be in the mix. We saw Lane Kiffin did that with Pete Golding at Ole Miss. So I think both LSU, Ole Miss, could be teams to look for in the mix for Boo Carter. Edwin Joseph, another safety, Florida State guy, will be one to look for. And then some other corners to look for that we've seen enter in previous days who should be starters at decent schools. Bo Masco from Rutgers, AJ Harris, Penn State. For him, Virginia Tech could be an option, following James Franklin. And then Jaheim Johnson is leaving Tulane. And again, we'll have to look for him potentially at Florida if he's going to follow John Summerall there. But another thing I wanted to talk about was get into some schools. In the last day or two, we have seen all kinds of North Texas guys enter the portal. Not shocking, considering how good they were, and Eric Morris going to Oklahoma State. I'm sure some of them end up there. But at the running back position, I talked about Hawkins a lot. He's the best running back left in the portal. But also Mackenzie McGill, Jaden Becks, and Ashton Gray are all leaving North Tech. They have three good in the portal. Wyatt Young is one of the better receivers out there. Miles Coleman and Terrence both in the portal for them. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Sadiq Clements and Jaden Williams, both good interior D linemen. JJ Jean-Louis, one of the better linebackers in the portal. Again, North Texas guy. So that team is, best season they've had in a while. They've hired Neil Brown to be the next head coach there. That roster is going to look a lot different next year because of all the guys they're losing who are going to be leaving the Mean Green. Excuse me. And that's not even us talking about Drew Mestemaker at QB, who officially has not entered the portal, though we expect he will do that. And a lot of the conventional wisdom, a lot of people think he'll go to Oklahoma State with Morris. Another one I have heard for him as a possibility could be the University of Tennessee. So that's going to be a school to look for with him. And then in the Sun Belt, I talked about James Madison briefly and us expecting they're going to lose a lot of guys. Boy, have they. Alonze Barnett, their QB's in the portal. Wayne Knight, Io, Di at running back are both in the portal. Di is, I believe, a former North Texas guy himself. Landon Ellis and Aaron Fire at receiver in the portal. Riley Robel will be one of the better interior linemen in the portal. He will certainly end up at a P4 school. So Riley Robel is his name, one to look for. Aiden Gobira is an edge, undersized guy, 6'5", but only about 250, 260, but a very good pass rusher. So Aiden Gobira is his name, coming from JMU. And then at defensive back, they have two names to look for. Tyler Brown is a decent safety. And then one of the better corners in the portal is DJ Barksdale. He's a Rock Hill, South Carolina guy. So the South Carolina and North Carolina schools, along with, with the JMU guys, I wonder how many or if some of them will indeed follow Chesney to UCLA. Long way to go, but, travel-wise, may not be an option, an inhibitor for them. And then some other recent portal names we've seen who have entered within the last 24 hours. Keon Wiley, running or a linebacker from Penn State was a decent recruit. Jakari Henderson, a defensive back, corner specifically from UCF. He was he's a Florida guy originally from that area. So looking at him there. Carson Brown, receiver at Iowa State, to go with Xavier Townsend, one of their other receivers, who will be in the portal. Trevor Jackson, who was Taylon Green's backup at Arkansas this year at QB. Trevor Jackson has entered the portal. So he's originally a Florida native, run around type guy. For Jackson, walk me if he falls Petrino to North Carolina, depending on if Gio Lopez is going to stay there. I think he's a fit for that offense. More maybe Jackson wants to go back to Florida. Who knows? We'll see. I just seeing this for the first time that he entered the portal. But and then another one who's entered. We were just talking about North Texas. Desmond Mejia, O-tackle, will be leaving North Texas in the portal. So that's continuing the exodus for them. Henry Hasselbeck was back QB at UCLA. Of course, his dad, Matt, former Seattle Seahawk, longtime guy there. But Hasselbeck is a Boston area guy. So maybe go back to the East Coast. We don't know what he's going to do. But that's all I'm going to have for you today, guys. But I want to thank you for being here. Just wanted to go through a lot of the portal guys who we've seen enter in recent days, and just put some names on your radar that you can look for, figure out where they might end up in the portal, who whatever team you follow, what position you need, and feel free to, whether it be on the Off-Season After Dark page or my Hughesman CFB page, or the comments here. If there is a guy or a team you want me to look at in the portal and talk about, feel free to do that. So be glad to focus on talking about anything you guys want. And again, thank you for being here. For our whole group schedule, obviously usually I'm a Tuesday morning one, but I did the live one today at Monday. This week, and last week, our schedules are a bit off. I actually don't know the Biscuits and SEC guys' schedule this week. If they're still doing a Wednesday night one. I know the big one, our SEC After Dark, our group show, which is usually Thursday, we are doing that tomorrow, Tuesday the 30th at 9 Eastern, 8 Central. So again, our group SEC After Dark tomorrow, Tuesday night at 9 Eastern, and that is so we can preview the 4 quarterfinal playoff games before they take place. And then, Corey Burton, check out him at Locked On Vandy. I was on his guest on Locked On Vandy, the episode that dropped this morning. Steve Willis, Locked On Ole Miss. They're going strong, obviously getting ready for that playoff game. I will be on his pregame show before the Ole Miss Georgia game. And then ACC, he's our Bama double dose, Bama After Dark, and then Tide Talk. That's Jake Thomas, does a great job there. And then the aforementioned Biscuits and SEC guys. I don't know if their schedule's staying the same this week, but whether it is or isn't, you should subscribe to the free bi-weekly newsletter. It is fantastic. So again, I wanted to thank all of you for being here. I hope you had a Merry Christmas and you have a great New Year's. Please ask any questions you want, and I look forward to seeing you later. Thank you.